Hi, Martina.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, fine. I my At the last minute my call was cancelled, so I thought I'd just come on here because I didn't realize there's a separate Discord channel for this group. I thought we were gonna stick with the main group, so I missed a bunch of stuff. But anyhow, we're here now.
Yeah, I somehow have a challenge with always when I sign up for this call, I don't get an invite email anymore. So I don't know whether it's me or
Uh Well, I connect with the diary into my Outlook so I can see Trust over IP calendar, all calls.
okay.
I think to subscribe to a call, you have to join the email group.
Okay, because it worked with all the other calls. So I don't know. But
That's strange.
it's not a big issue. I mean, I'm here. So
Okay. Well, I was just going to hang out till Scott and or Sankashan joined.
all good. Good the same.
Hello,
Hi,
Nikki.
Sakshan. How are you?
Hi. I'm doing good. Just saw your message that you were on the bridge. Didn't want to
No worries.
interfere.
I just thought I didn't even know there was a separate Discord channel for this group, so I hadn't seen your earlier posts. Um, so I thought maybe there would be others who'd been similarly um, not in the loop. So I wanted to make sure that no willing participants were left hanging.
The Discord because we pointed out last meeting that there was no separate channel, and he got around to somebody in LFTT to get this sorted.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's just as well. The relationship VCR group has got a separate channel, so haven't they? And hopefully Scott. Uh, yeah. Anyhow, I'm just like doing the process thing, like we all do, uh, to keep the conversation going. And crikey, you've done loads of work here, Sankashon. Let me stop sharing screens, and you can share your screen.
Okay, let me first figure out where I kept the spreadsheet. Give me one sec. Fair enough. Let's see that I can share screen. I should be able to share screen.
Yeah, I did put it in the share drive as well, just so other folks could take a look.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. You should be seeing something of a spreadsheet on the screen at this
I
moment, I
can.
guess. Let me know if you want me to zoom in a bit, because it's probably best to do it a bit. So, I started with this diagram of yours because I think this is the one that we keep coming back to figure out not only the scope, but also the entire ecosystem in which all of this fits in. And one of the things I have been realizing is although we want to do this in a very scoped manner for the purposes of delivering something meaningful, I think eventually the folks like yourself, Scott, will end up being the reviewers for the output from the other groups who are tackling the separate issues. And then you are going to get into a bit of a review cycle to be able to say if they're doing it things correctly or not. And I think that's gonna happen. Whether we you want it that way or not is a probably a question that is best left not discussed. So what I did was because I started from this diagram itself, I then looked at the scope and then tried to understand the scope in context of the entire diagram that you have put out and figuring out because this is just some sort of a kind of to me more in terms of like okay here various sandboxes that and the various components and we are not specifically trying to build relationships or trying to apply that actor party action model kind of thing but more like okay these are the topics that we need to keep in front of ourselves to do this in a meaningful manner. So I took it in that same context and then eventually ended up with let me just use this sheet first and then I can walk you through the rest of it. So then I ended up with basically these are topics in my way of thinking that these are various topics that will end up requiring risk elements to be uh, reviewed, examined as they are built out by different teams or even different individuals. And so with that in mind, I ended up sort of like having all this in separate tabs in the sheet and effectively trying to see what kind of risk might originate in one particular topic and where it would originate from, what would be the consequence, the likelihood, impact. This is all standard stuff. And then also, how would you prevent, how would you recommend preventing that risk from happening. I'll take this very god awfully easy example, which is if your risk is in governance that you have opaque decisions, then you probably see that the decision making paths and things that create those decisions could be smart contracts, could be various forms of contracts. They are logged poorly, leading to some sort of compliance and regulatory risk that gets created. And like, if we just assume that the likelihood is medium because everybody is very smart about writing smart contracts, then probably the control that you need is transparent logs, and the owner should be the admin authority for this entire ecosystem who's deploying whatever is getting deployed. And similarly, for each of these tabs, there are various things. Now, I know this is not the way in which you and Scott are doing this. I'm very much aware of it. This is something I was actually using in a project that I was involved in. And so I thought, like, okay, let me just be lazy enough to reuse a framework I'm familiar with and then put stuff in. And then if it works out, I'll sit down with both of you and then stuff it into the format that you have and kind of like, for instance, that is the human experiences. These are very high level topics, whereas in your spreadsheet they go into much more granular detail. The reason they are high level is because I was a lazy chap and I didn't want to drill down into every single one of them. More in terms of like, okay, do I have a reasonable high level topic mapping done so that we can, if required, do a workshop and drill down into these and more as they come across. And then this is effectively a sort of like a risk and their associated control and all of that listing. So that's basically it. And the reason I said there's not a lot of work done over here is because this is significantly lazy work, and this entire first tab is really generated by Gemini. So I cannot claim any effort in this at this point.
Well, so first of all, I would say it's not a million miles away at all from the approach that Scott and I are using. Uh, and it is easily adapted. And I mean you can cut it in various ways, and you've cut it one way, and Scott's cut it another, and this approach of look at the domains and then separate tabs, separate risk logs. That's the exact process that I used for in my other project that I was showing a couple of weeks ago. And I also used AI to generate some of the risks in some of the tabs, and then use that as a starting point to um, to give me a kind of, as you say, rough and ready starting point. It got many holes, many imperfections, but it's a place to start rather than a load of blank rows. So that's the second comment. The third would be I really like if you go to one of the tabs, I really like this consequence, or if you go to say governance, yeah, you've got the cause. So there's an element of causal chain, and I think that that could be very useful in, for example, workshoppings. Well, why is there policy drift? And you go back up a level.
Exactly.
Um,
For me, if I don't get a hang of what the cause is, I kind of run into a blank wall trying to imagine a whole bunch of things that need to be fixed. But if we
mm,
kind of, if we scope down, okay, there are three root causes for this
yeah,
problem to arise, then it's easy for anything to plan, either write a policy text, create a mitigation plan, or even write
yeah,
a test plan
or a
for that.
tighter control,
Yes.
which is the other aspect I was going to really congratulate you on, which is, and I spent some time looking at GRC software and frameworks in the last few months. And what I noted is we're all quite good at risks, but then we don't have the same systemic, like structured approach to the controls and policies. So you have technical controls and then policies that, and you can almost envisage almost a drop down on those controls and policies that you can assign to various different risks. And the way we're not going, I'm not going to use GRC software because I'm not a professional. So I'm just using spreadsheets and creating a pivot table on risks and controls so that I can prioritize the controls implementation and as opposed to the risks. So what two things can I do this month, say, that will reduce my overall risks score on this on this this platform, this implementation? So I think there's more development that could go on that side in terms of controls, because when it gets down to it, there are lots of controls, but they apply to multiple risks. And having a spreadsheet which only has the risk dimension, I think will limit our effectiveness in terms of those requirements. Because if you think about it, the requirements are really the controls.
Yes.
Um, and uh, and so I think there's a lot we can learn from this. And Scott and I already agreed that part of this process of using the risk assessment like methodology and framework that he's laid out is an opportunity to update it, to improve it. And I think there are a couple of elements here that will really help with that. So the root cause analysis component, and the controls element. So, and in terms of consequences, I'd sort of introduce this idea of which group of stakeholders does it particularly impact? Does it most severely impact? I mean, in other words, who carries the risk? And you've called that the risk owner. Um, but I think they're probably slightly different things, who it impacts and who owns the kind
Yeah,
of.
who's there are two parts to it. Who's affected by it and who's the owner? I mean, I I keep on saying this, but this was mostly an exercise for me to figure out what is the body of knowledge both of you and Scott are building up, and then get a sense of what can we do with it. Because there are two things I'm very interested in, and I think this is a very critical moment to consider in trust over IP work. Is one is that uh, every organization which is a standard body of sorts, is publishing various formats of risk management frameworks, right? And some of these are useful and some of those are not. Some of those are not even, I mean, they're not worth the bytes that they spend on the server. But the the thing that we kind of have not done in the previous iterations of doing harms and prevention and risk management activities, that we have not yet been able to push it to the point where we kind of say to the various stakeholders that are building the platform or the system software or whatever, is here are the specific problems that you are going to encounter in design. Some of these problems will impact your end consumers. Some of these problems will impact your controllers or operators or administrators. And you have to decide as to in terms of how you calibrate whatever risks you find appetizing enough to release into the wild, and which ones you are going to do a very neat job of mitigating. And I think we are not yet at a stage where we do that from a trust over IP perspective. I know that in other work that you have produced, Nikki, that you have done similar. And in fact, in the checked documents that you had pointed me to read to there, it was there was a clear undercurrent of here's what is going to happen. Kind of a
Yeah.
warning in place.
We know these things to be true. I think you make a
Yes.
really valid point about risk appetite as well. Um, that so ultimate that's why it's so difficult to do it from a technology only perspective, and why my sense got still to be persuaded, but he's the master of risk assessment. But I still think having scenarios and use cases to talk about is useful, because uh, unless we have that, so how would it work for, I don't know, like a social healthcare provider using decentralized trust graph instead of biometrics for carers and people providing meals on wheels, and chiropodists and hairdressers and gardeners and cleaners and all the other things that someone in supported living might need, as a scenario versus a Linux kernel scenario. The risk appetite is different. The consequences of the interactions and transactions are different. The likelihood and impact is different, and ultimately the risk appetite is different. So, yeah, I mean, working the process. I mean, we learned a lot from this when we did it with Yoma about what was useful and what wasn't useful. It played into some of the like domain modeling language we were using around the governance framework. Um, and so hopefully by working the process, we can substantively contribute and think about online tools. I've been looking at this thing from Turing Institute recently about, which is called T. Unfortunately, um, like bunch of links in the website are broken. I've reached out to them to try and get a bit more clarity on what they're doing, but they're kind of developing, how I see it and understand it, is conformance testing for governance. So currently we've got like conformance test suites for things like TRQP and I know MIMS and decentralized identity profile and things like that. So technical compliance standards. And what they seem to be trying to do at Turing is create something similar for governance scenarios. Hi, Scott.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Sorry. It looks like, it was funny because I allocated the first half hour for something billable and that didn't turn. So anyway, I wanted to give as much time to Sankarshan. He spent a lot of time thinking about the risk assessment and appreciated all that effort and wanted you to walk us through that so that we see what we can do about that.
Okay. I am going to do that again. Again, because uh, I did that for Nikki. Uh, Let me first find where this. I don't know why I keep on losing where I keep the spreadsheet. It's just annoying at this point in time. So yeah. All right. Uh, so I want to begin with three things. One is this format is obviously not in the same way that the spreadsheet that you designed, devised, and you have productized across trust over IP and other places. There's a reason for this. There are two reasons for this. One is the fact that I was using this particular format for a separate project and I was lazy enough not to go back to yours and thought like, okay, let me just run a copy and try and see what I can get to. That's the first point. Second point is the reason I did this was I wanted to understand the entire body of knowledge that you and Nikki have created so far for this and understand it in my own way. It's sort of a rubber duck way of say explaining to myself. So this spreadsheet is my rubber duck. I explain it to myself and then figure out if I have managed to explain it well enough for others to also understand. So this is what is kind of a register of risks. This initial tab is was created using AI based on this particular diagram that I started off from this diagram. This is very familiar. We have been using this for a while. And the entire thing that I wanted to do is look at this diagram as a whole and figure out at a very high level what kind of risks that I could sort of enumerate for the various kind of components if I identify them as components. And these are the components that you see in this column A. And then these components obviously have their corresponding sheets. And then each of these sheets will have certain very superficial high level risks created because I was trying not to drill down and complete it, but more importantly, get a sense of like, do I understand it at a very high level? And so this results in such a situation where we have various tabs for the various risks and governance. And there are three things that I wanted to understand when I was doing this. One was like if I could actually find the risk element, uh, was I able to understand it, the root cause of it to be able to determine, okay, what could be a control for it? And then effectively also figure out what is the consequence once I have the cause and all. So this is kind of the same pattern that repeats itself over the various risk components that are identified, and then it goes all the way up to I don't know, it goes all the way up to this one. Yeah, the systemic is essentially like almost there is a whole bunch of things that can go wrong, and then if they go wrong, I really don't know how we are going to do it. So the reason there at a very high level is fairly simple. One is I was lazy enough not to drill down to very specific. The second one, I thought that if this is actually found useful at all, we could kind of workshop it and then build out to a granular level that is there in your spreadsheet, Scott, and then kind of make it the master sheet in which we document everything and allow a bunch of decisions and risk appetite conversations to come about from this. That's all there is to this spreadsheet. So, like I said, I mean, this is not a lot of work. This is just lazy work to make myself understand what the heck I am doing.
All right, so I had a couple questions about this. So did you derive this from something else, or you did your own analysis that came up with these likelihoods impacts as it relates to the decentralized trust graph risks? Or is this something you're just bringing over from something else
No,
that
this
you've
is no.
analyzed?
This is not. So what I did was I pretty much had this printed out, and then as I ended up having these components, just these are a kind of I wouldn't say these are placeholders, but these are mostly my thought lines in terms of like, okay, is it really going to happen if we have a reasonably good system? The question is, if we don't have a good system of governance, then all the likelihoods of media might actually be very high. Don't know, but the question then becomes, if all the likelihoods are very high, then you basically have an ungoverned system.
Right. Well,
And so
but
this is
here's the thing about that, and that's fine. When you're analyzing the risks, you're not considering, you shouldn't consider mechanisms to reduce the risk. Okay, that would be something that you do later because when you have to identify the likelihood and impact just to identify whether this is a risk that, what's the existing risk without any mechanisms in place to see if it's worthy to put mechanisms in place. So if you already factor in mechanisms to reduce it, that kind of defeats the purpose. So you're
I
already
see what
assuming that
you're
you
saying.
are
Yeah, yeah.
already adding these mechanisms in. And that's fine. it seems like you were just going through the process in your head to identifying risks that you saw and risks and doing the qualification around that. Now, um, what what I would like to see, if it's possible, is if we can take this work that you've done and thought through and see if we could populate the existing spreadsheet. Because, the cause consequence, they need to be explained to folks so that we have a, let's say, task force and then working group acceptance of all of this. And I think we just need to, it's not as clear looking at it. It's clear to you maybe because you've gone through the process and this is how you've gotten to a point, but it has to stand on its own so that others can look at it and say, okay, we've done a due diligence over the risks, and then we've populated, the likelihood and impact without any controls in place. I think your inherent risk in G is calculated. That would be the risk score from what I can derive. Is that correct?
Yes. It could
Okay.
it could be a risk score. It could be a risk. It could be a level of tolerance. We could interpret it in a way. And I agree with what you just said that we have to sort of unshackle this exercise that I did that was purely let me try to understand, and then I posted it to our channel just to say, okay, am I even looking at it and understanding in the correct manner? I'm not saying that this is how we want to do it because, like I said, this is quite far from the way your sheet is formatted, and I think we want to put it in that sheet and in that format. My main idea was here is how I understood the work done so far, and it seems like an interesting pattern is emerging. And we should try and see how we can then use our existing way of building the risk assessment framework and make
Right.
it more useful. Nikki, you have your hand up. Sorry, I'll.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Scott, Sankashan and I were just chatting before. There are two aspects of. So first of all, I don't think this is a million miles away. I think it can map quite
No,
nicely
it
into,
does. Yeah, I
yeah.
agree.
Secondly, I love, I really like the cause element of it and consequence. I think we can do some causal chains and root cause analysis, which will really help us because your risks are in clusters, right? And that those clusters may go across a number of domains because they link together to create harms, essentially. The other aspect of it, which is a bit more structural, and I'll just reflect what I'm kind of thinking and see what you think is. So I spent quite a few hours in the last months looking at GRC software and trying to update my spreadsheets to do what GRC software does. And I've recognized this important thing that we focus on the risk table. If this were not in a spreadsheet, but in a database, a relational database, then we would also have a controls table. And one control or policy intervention can address multiple risks. And I think the controls and the policy interventions are requirements for the other task forces. And the kind of so we can see the dark patterns, the risk patterns, and we can also see the control and governance patterns that help in mitigation of those risks. So what I can offer to do here is work on that controls list. and I might do a little bit of experimentation on Google to see if we were to use a database instead of a spreadsheet, could we also perhaps use our own intelligence and supported by AI to start mapping controls over. And what I found in the work I've been doing elsewhere for this client, where unbelievably I'm responsible for security and privacy and trust in this ecosystem, is actually the work that needs to be done relates less to risks and more to control. So, for example, my analysis this month has shown me that if I was to do an algorithmic impact assessment and an AI terms of use and to do an IAM review, I would reduce my overall risk score by about 10% because it touches so many of the risks that I've identified. So those were my two observations on the work, apart from let's move it over, not lose it, because I think the controls are still useful. You can't help but start thinking about controls. Um, and move it over to the spreadsheet, as you said, Scott, in terms of let's start populating. But I think those two things of causes and controls are really worth thinking about in terms of how we work.
Yeah, I mean, what I like the best about what you did, Sankarshan, is you saw it through, and I love that, and I don't want to lose that. So I will, and I want to be clear. I want to take whatever we can out of that process and make it a collaborative risk rating, associated with pull out what you needed to do to get comfort, which is great, but put whatever is needed, to the collective spreadsheet so that we can then collaboratively then get it to where you are getting it to mentally. So because I think there may be more risks or other risks but I want to populate it. Right now, you've spent the time analyzing the scenario, and I want to capture that. That's the piece I don't want to lose is your thought leadership around that. It's the format we can work with, okay, and maybe risk assessment and judgments and things like that that we can have you participate with, Nikki, myself, Drummond, and anyone else that wants to participate in that. So, I mean, I can give it a go to try to transform it into and to populate that other spreadsheet, but I don't know if I could do that justice because I think, Sankarshan, now that you have at least a clear understanding of how to get to the spreadsheet that you're presenting, you may be able to better populate the other spreadsheet with your thoughts around that, and we can either review that, agree upon it, don't agree upon it, help me understand how do we get from where you are to what we can do as a collective task force.
I think we can do this in, I mean, the manner in which we get to populating the spreadsheet that we are using at Trust over IP, there are many ways to get it. And we could spin up a separate meeting among the three of us or anyone who's interested in sort of lift and shift, or you wait for me to complete at least a first pass and then we review that. That could happen as well. Whichever you think gets us off the ground faster.
Well,
I
let's
know,
see
Claire.
this. Can you give
Yeah,
it,
go ahead.
in a week, is it
Yeah.
possible for you to take whatever you've done and make an attempt to populate a copy of whatever of that trust over IP spreadsheet And then you can say some of the challenges you had, or even recommendations. I'm not saying that we use that trust over IP spreadsheet per se, but it is at least a methodology that I am comfortable with and I can drive.
Yeah,
If that's not the way, then someone else will have to drive it because we need to get to some ending of that. So
yeah. So let me do it this way. I'll take a look at completing a first pass of whatever I feel I have understood and can sort of like lift and shift into the format that we all know. And I'll do it over the weekend ish and post a message back to our Discord channel if I have made progress or if I've run into a wall or sort. So by let's say next Monday or Tuesday, we have an update. Uh, and that probably is going to get us somewhere started and see where we can go with it. How's that sound?
right. Yeah, that'd be good. And then Drummond, you can explain that this is where we can, this is what we're doing. Sankarshan came in, we were talking about it, we were looking at his thought leadership around that. And I don't even know if we need to present that because that's an interim step. And you can say, well, Sankarshan's going to rethink it and see if how we can, repopulate it or add to the spreadsheet we were working on, and then once we've had at least a session next Tuesday into reviewing that, then we can present that to the group the next a week from Wednesday.
Okay, so are you saying that there's no need to present anything tomorrow, which is fine. What
Right,
do you want?
except for status.
Just a status. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
And
I'm not going to be available tomorrow, by the way. Just I'm traveling for business for business for the rest of the week.
got it. No problem. Nikki, did you already update the agenda?
I did,
Thank you.
and I'm going to do it now for tomorrow.
I'm not sh when you say you're going to do it now for tomorrow, what do you mean? You mean update it again?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
with with the
I mean,
notes.
And we have 9 minutes left. Not enough time to really do anything besides just show. I'm interested in because Nikki, you were taken by this John Phillips thing. I just want to know what it is. Is there a way that you can just show it to
Yeah,
us
so some time
without getting much
ago,
of a deep tone? Yeah.
uh, some time ago, we it came up in the email discussion in first person project about, and John put forward the scenario of um, revoking a relationship credential. So Alice wants to end the relationship with Bob. She can revoke the credential, obviously, but what does that mean for the right to be forgotten, in particular under GDPR? She can't force Bob to remove the credential. So I have reread it. I read it at the time, and reread it. I mean, he dumped it into Gemini, and he was really open about that. But it's quite an interesting exploration, and I think what we can take for this group is he's identified a number of human harms and essentially social situations and constructs that could lead to human harms and that have some consequences for how we design. So I've kind of in my comments, oh, wants me to sign in. God, this bloody
I
authentication business.
love it when it interrupts you in the middle of your real work. Just go, oh,
Yeah,
by the way,
exactly.
Nikki, we need you to really know that you're you again.
Uh, Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it's a nice read. So, this is the risk. The system prioritizes the integrity of historical attestations and individual control over and above one party's ability to compel erasure from another's private records. But it goes on to say that essentially the right to be forgotten legally doesn't apply. Um, obviously, that needs to be checked by a lawyer. And ultimately, if I was to summarize, it said that your controls are in governance, which was the main conclusion of the Harms paper. And what like the 60,000-foot view from me of what this means for this group is we've tried to put governance out of scope because it's in the ecosystem. Um, we have said we'll provide governance requirements and therefore going back to our technical controls, technical requirements, and policies, governance. Um, that you can't control it. It's like any technology; it can be weaponized and it can be good, used for good or ill. This is quite a useful table about why it doesn't sit under the right to be forgotten. But again, maybe that's a gap in the law. Um, I certainly don't think it's a legal risk in this situation because it's relational and uh, sorry about that. I thought this was quite interesting because it does go to one of the conclusions of the Harms paper was that vulnerable people are, by definition, almost inevitably, harms are uneven in their distribution because of power, essentially, within the system. Um, so there's it goes through this scenario of essentially someone who's being coercively controlled by their partner. Bob is trying to control Alice. And these are social facts that, are why social media can be so harmful. You enable social relationships and by enabling them, you also enable bad relationships as well as good ones. So
Okay.
this is the very the sort of fuzzy socio-technical side of it. And it requires I'm not sure that the harms framework, despite hours and hours of work on it, is useful, but I've I,
Well,
I've kind of
here's
used it to characterize. If you remember in the harms framework, we had four contexts, and the stuff we can only really do something about is the interaction context and the kind of ecosystem or contingent harm context. So uh, we'll see. Anyhow, I've kind of put some notes in here, and again, Scott, I'll move it into the spreadsheet. But the main reason I wanted to put it on the agenda is John did this work. It's a genuine question. It's a whole bunch of harms that go to the heart of, decentralized trust graph, these relationship credentials.
right.
And so for that reason, that's why I'm going to try and go on the APAC call because, the whole purpose of these groups is to give a platform for diverse and contributions. And so I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't lost.
Yeah. No, I would agree. So we only have a minute left, and what I'd like to see is if we could distill information from this article or white paper and see, as you were alluding to, if there are categories of risks, especially it seems more around the harms. Let's just throw it under harms and at least populate it. And then we have this document, which would be good if I had a link to it, so that we can then at least carry forward with the gist of some of this information, carry forward with that with the harms, have a backup of, okay, what is that harm? We have some documentation in the white paper to describe that, and then use that and see if it if it applies to the work we're doing and the risk assessment that we're doing. So there was certain, like right to be forgotten. That's certainly that's a stated risk. And other things like that, concepts that are coming out of this document, that I want to take whatever we can use out of it and just kind of spitball it on our spreadsheet so we don't lose it. And then we can further determine if it's something after we bring it through the process of likelihood and severity, whether it's something that our project wants to do more work around.
Yep, that makes sense to me. I got to jump to the technical stack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to attend.
Thank you
that as
so
well.
much, Sankashan. You've really
Yeah,
Yeah,
excellent.
moved us forward.
very cool stuff, Sankashan. I didn't see all of it, but I was like, wow, this is really good thinking going into this. So making real progress.
Great. See you guys tomorrow. Take care.
All
Excellent.
right.
Thanks so
Bye.
Bye-bye.
much. You bet.